Our world has an amazing innovation ecosystem. Universities have played an absolutely critical role in the development of all of these technologies, and universities will continue to be a core part of enabling this progress for humankind.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Wes Bush.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me all right? Good, good. Well, I really appreciate you taking some time out of your afternoon to come here, and I look forward to the opportunity to have some really good discussion with all of you. I know it's a busy time in the semester, and so this is kind of an extra burden to take a little time out and be here, but thank you for doing that. I've really been looking forward to speaking with all of you, especially because I have the opportunity to address a topic that I feel to be of great importance: innovation and its role in our world. Now, it's clear to me that Northeastern University students are receiving an outstanding education, and many of you will be taking on leadership roles over time. And my hope is that you see innovation as a leadership imperative as you go forward. I have the great fortune of working at a global defense technology company called Northrop Grumman. We employ about 65,000 people, and roughly half of our employees are technologists of some form: scientists, engineers, mathematicians, computer scientists, you name it. We have the full spectrum of amazing technological capacity in our organization. And our mission is to support the security of our nation and that of our allies. I think many of you know that our national security strategy relies on two fundamental pillars. First, we always work hard as a nation to make sure that we have the very best trained and equipped servicemen and women in our services. But secondly, we also work really hard on making sure that we have the technology that enables absolute technological superiority for our servicemen and women around the globe. We never want them to be in a fair fight. We always want the technological edge on our side. And as I mentioned, while about half of our employees are technologists, all of our employees need to be innovators. People who employ new and different ways of doing things to create value where it did not exist before. So innovation is the heart and soul of our national security system, and it really has been that way for a long time, pretty much since the end of World War II, as we got into the Cold War period. And it was that strategy of focusing on technological superiority that allowed us to maintain our military strength without bankrupting our economy in the process. And I know for those that have studied the history of the Cold War, many times people think that we won the Cold War by outspending the Soviet Union. And I think that's actually the wrong conclusion. I believe we out-innovated them, and we did it in a very efficient manner. So innovation has been core to enabling our position in the world. And it's not just about defense. Innovation is the heart and soul of our non-defense world as well. So let me give you just a few examples of what I mean by that, and we could spend all evening actually talking about the examples of the impact of innovation. But just to give a little bit of a framework, the advances that are occurring in the field of biology, I think, are absolutely amazing, from genomics to the ability to actually manufacture cells that are designed to do specific jobs. These innovations are enabling new treatments for diseases, and they're creating new understanding of our world, and they are revolutionizing the field of biology and so many other fields that are connected to it. Another example, the robotic exploration of space, from the Mars landers to the new great observatories that are being built. These activities, too, are rapidly changing our understanding of our universe. One of our programs within our company is called the James Webb Space Telescope. It promises to revolutionize our understanding of our universe. This instrument is essentially a time machine, because when you have a very large telescope, you're receiving light that was emitted many, many, many years ago, and you're able to see the past. In fact, the James Webb Space Telescope is designed to take a look at the receding edge of the universe so that we can understand what things were doing around 14 billion years ago. The technologies that go into a system such as this are phenomenal. This is a system that will operate about 1 million miles away from the Earth. It deploys a very large sun shield to keep it cold enough so that it can receive those very weak little photons coming at us from 14 billion years of travel. And it truly is an enabling system to revolutionize our understanding, not only of our universe, but the very physics that drive the operations of our universe. Another example, cognitive intelligence. This is the future of many vectors of technology, and it's finding its ways into just about every single field. In fact, for us, it's becoming cheaper to design cognitive intelligence into a system than it would be to actually program a system for every contingency that it might face. It really is, in many respects, a natural follow-on to the information revolution, and it will make it easier to translate the vision of innovators into tangible results that will benefit us all. And speaking of the information revolution, technology innovation results in business model innovation just about every day. Just think about the transformation that we've all seen in our lifetimes, some longer than others, but in all of our lifetimes. The transformations that we've seen in retailing, how you go about getting a ride, or even how you go about finding a place to stay. Those business model revolutions have come about because of the changes in technology. Cybersecurity is another area of rapid advancement and changes. And I think we all know that with our reliance on information technology, everything that we do, from national security to entertainment to the infrastructure needs of daily life, we must find and innovate new ways of ensuring the security of our networks and our computing systems. So as I said, this is just a little short list, but the idea is to talk about change, the change in our world that is going on every single day, and the innovation that is driving that change. This transformation that we're seeing around us all the time really has profound impacts on how organizations, whether they are companies or universities or other enterprises, how these organizations operate and how they are led. Clearly, when everyone in an organization is committed to innovation in whatever they may be doing to support the organization, it makes for a great place to work. But no organization exists in a vacuum, at least not for very long. Because innovation is the product of the human mind and of human vision, it thrives or it withers in direct relation to the health of the ecosystem that we as humans create around it. We have collectively worked very hard over many decades to create a very robust innovation ecosystem in the United States. And let me describe what I think are some of its key features. It starts with an innovative spirit that leverages what I believe continues to be the best higher education system in the world, Northeastern being a part of that great system. It also requires, and has had for many years, a high cultural value placed on free inquiry and expansive thinking. Diversity of thought, ideas and perspectives, driven by the diversity of teams doing the work, is another key element. When we think about the legal side of it, the property rights that we have incentivize innovation endeavors. The rule of law that makes possible those property rights is critical. And capital markets that support the transition of innovation from the theoretical to the practical, that is to say, from a great idea to real benefit in our lives, that too is a core part of our innovation ecosystem. This isn't something that just happened. As I said, it's taken a long time to create it, and it's something that's very, very valuable that many others around the globe wish they had. And we must always guard against taking the health of this ecosystem for granted. We must nurture it to keep it vibrant, and we must continue to change and grow it. Just some examples of how some of these elements of the ecosystem have made such a profound impact. I mentioned earlier the innovations in business models that have occurred. But I also touched on, in my list of elements, the legal side of things. So just a little view of that would be the fracking revolution. That revolution has reduced our dependence on foreign oil, and it has reduced our need to drill for crude oil on land and at sea, and fortunately has kept gasoline prices relatively low. That type of revolution might never exist in some places around the globe, such as Europe, for example, because privately owned mineral rights are virtually unknown there. So it's just a little insight into how all these pieces have to work together to create this ecosystem that is working quite well for us. Our commitment to innovation and to the ecosystem it requires to thrive, I think, will be critical to the many challenges facing us today and in the future, critical to driving solutions. And I believe that humankind in general, and the human condition in particular, progresses or stagnates based on the quality and the vitality of our innovation. So we really must support this ecosystem. We must also ensure that our enterprises are healthy elements of that system. And doing that requires leadership. People have to take action to make it happen. So how do we cultivate innovation at the level of the enterprise, those areas where ideas most frequently translate into tangible benefits? First, I think we have to make sure that we're creating value over long periods of time by driving innovation as a core value of our culture. So let me discuss a couple of components of a healthy innovation culture within any enterprise. This isn't just about companies. It's also about universities. It's about any type of organization. I'll touch on two of the competencies that I think are most important. There are many others, but hopefully we can touch on some of those in our Q&A session. The two I wanted to talk about are discouraging risk aversion and encouraging diversity. So let me start with risk aversion. There's often a negative public perception when something new fails. And usually that negative perception is accompanied by speculation that the system was faulty in its conception or perhaps shoddily constructed. And certainly those accusations are occasionally warranted, but I think most often that perception is uninformed. Because warranted or not, risk is inherent in innovation. In fact, one could argue that prototypes that are not pushed to failure in their testing represent a testing program that is not giving the customer its money's worth. After all, how will the engineers and technologists ever know what a system is capable of doing if we don't push it all the way to failure in its testing? So there's an inherent tension between the necessity of failure on the one hand and the often uninformed negative responses that they induce. And that tension makes it easy for a culture of risk aversion to take hold in any organization, even those founded on innovation. Business leaders, in particular, I believe, must work hard to squelch that very human trait that often drives people to try to avoid failure or even the perception of failure. That tendency needs to be squelched because failures are inherent in pushing the technology to its maximum. And if you're going to have real innovation over long periods of time, you've got to push the technology, you've got to see the failures. When we're risk averse, that sends a very dangerous message to an organization's best innovators that the place where they work is not devoted to true research, unlimited development, and pioneering innovation that drives them and energizes them. I think risk management is the better perspective in innovative enterprises. It recognizes the necessity of failure, it plans for it, and it provides the path forward to success. Now, I think too many leaders hear the words risk management and they translate it to risk aversion. In fact, I've even seen that phenomena happen in universities. And when that translation incorrectly occurs, it is to the detriment of their enterprises. Leaders need to understand this difference, and they need to incorporate its implications into their own personal leadership style. Another critical piece of the innovation puzzle is diversity, and I am a very strong believer in this because I've seen it work so incredibly well in our organization. One of our company's primary goals is to ensure and expand diversity and inclusion within our company at all levels of the organization. We know that diverse thinking and an inclusive environment generate better ideas and foster stronger team commitment, collaboration, and engagement, all of which are vital components of innovation. I see diverse teams outperform non-diverse teams so routinely that when we have a problem someplace in the business, one of the first things I look at is the diversity of the leadership team, and it's fascinating, the correlation. But diversity alone is not sufficient. It must be coupled with an inclusive environment that enables the power of diversity. And in addition to an inclusive workplace, the benefits that we see from a performance perspective, it also makes our enterprise more attractive to a broader array of valuable talent in a very competitive business environment. Leaders play a critical role in promoting diversity and inclusion. And I believe that leaders who genuinely value innovation also genuinely value diversity and inclusion. They aren't just words, they're the way the organization operates. They are the core values of the enterprise. So to sum up, I think it's clear, from my perspective, that innovation is the underpinning of the U.S. economy and for many economies around the globe. It works best when there is a healthy innovation ecosystem, almost a perfect storm of free inquiry, great education, the rule of law, including things such as property rights, and very strong, vibrant capital markets. Leaders have a role in fostering innovation, and it often comes down to these personal values that drive their decisions. And nurturing innovation, I believe, should be one of those values. I encourage each of you to give this some thought as you develop your own leadership framework and apply that framework to the tremendous opportunities that each of you are going to be facing over the course of your careers. There are many other aspects of the leadership imperative associated with innovation, and I do look forward to the opportunity to explore those more fully in our discussion. I look forward to your questions. Thanks again for being here today.
Thank you, Wes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome again. We're delighted to have you with us. Wes has spent with his team the better part of this day getting to meet with some of our researchers, getting to meet, more importantly, with some of our students too here. And thank you for spending so much time with us.
Thank you for having us.
So let me start by asking you a couple of questions, and as usual we have some questions from social media, and in addition we'll have the opportunity to have questions from the floor. You know, I interact with Wes at different levels. We're both part of the Business Higher Education Forum, with both part of the Commission on the Future of Undergraduate Education that was launched by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Why are you spending your time on education?
Well, for me, it basically comes down to a lot of what I was just describing. From my perspective, business is so critically dependent on the strength of higher education in our country that business leaders, from my view, have a real obligation to be there for higher education. We need to not only be supporters, we need to be tightly integrated into the fabric of higher education. And in particular, in a world that is changing so quickly, the dynamics that we all observe around our globe, we have to come together to work on the toughest problems. And there is no better partner for business to deal with tough challenges than higher education. So from my perspective, it's just absolutely critical for our economy, for the future of our country, and for the values that we all hold dear, for business to be partnered tightly with higher ed.
So at the same time, you are mentioning the responsibility and obligation of businesses.
Yes.
What about education? What about higher education? What's our responsibility? What do we need to do?
Well, it goes both ways. Partnerships cannot be one-directional. They have to be bi-directional. And we look for, in our partnerships with higher education, we look both for the leaders who are visionaries, and Northeastern is so fortunate to have such a great leader.
Thank you.
Absolutely. But we look for faculty that is open to working with business, and we look for students who are interested in those experiences. And what a great model Northeastern has. Fundamentally, the education model here intertwined with the co-op program in such a tight manner. I think it is just a very, very attractive model. But it has to go both ways. There has to be an interest on the part of higher education to engage with business, and it has to be done the right way. It needs to protect all the things that higher education holds dear, whether it is the complete academic freedom to explore the avenues that the faculty believes are important. There has to be an openness to the exchange and the interaction. But at the end of the day, it has to be what we seek from higher education is that open partnership model. We have no desire to try and suggest that we know better how to educate. That's not our business. We are not educators. But we want to be participants in the process, and we want to be engaged in a way that helps support this broader view of the innovation ecosystem that is the underpinning of the economy that we all support.
So you met with 10 of our co-op students, and you shared with them your views, they shared their views.
Yes.
When you look at talent, how do you evaluate talent in your organization?
So we look for a number of things in talent, and this is talent at all levels. It's important to understand that when we're talking about talent, we're not just speaking of folks that we want to see move into management over time. This is important for talent that pursues just about any vector within their career in our organization. It starts with ethics and integrity, and that might sound perhaps an obvious thing to say, but for us, it's absolutely critical. We do work on behalf of the U.S. and our allies, and our reputation is our ability to get complex things done. And if our company ever behaves in a manner that calls into question our credibility, our ethics, or our integrity, we can't do the things that we need to do. So that actually is the foundational thing that we search for, and the thing we have the least tolerance for in our organization. If we have individuals who act outside the bounds of our view on ethics and integrity, they don't last in our company. But moving beyond that, with that as the foundation, we look for very curious minds, those who have both the intellect and the natural curiosity to help us move forward. I mentioned in my talk that half of our employees are technologists of some form. But in addition to that, all of our other employees as well are innovators in their own right. So we pride ourselves on being a very innovative company. And if you think about the reason for that, as I mentioned in my talk, if we ever find ourselves in a place as a nation or as a group of allies where we have been surpassed technologically, we're in a really bad place. And the way you stay ahead is you constantly ask the question, how can we go faster? How can we accelerate change? Where can not only the technology take us, but where can the applications of those technologies take us? So we look for those with very, very creative minds in all dimensions of the work that we do. We do look for leadership skills as well, even in those who aren't aspiring to be managers over the course of their career. Because leadership is something that comes from within that enables you to put the best ideas forward. It gives you the ability to work with your team members and suggest a different path in a way that will be open and receptive to inputs that you'll get from others on your team, but will help you actually promote your own ideas and to help drive that change. So leadership is one of those kind of funny things. It's hard to test for, and you can only sort of see it over time. But it's an important part of our culture because we want our company to be a leader. We want all of our team members to see themselves and to act as leaders as they go forward. So those are just a few of our criteria.
But you mentioned one that was intriguing to me.
Yes, yeah.
Value creation.
Yes. So value creation is an interesting concept, and I think one that perhaps doesn't get enough focus as we all develop folks to work in whatever enterprise they choose. And if you think about the role that you play, whether in a university or in a company, if you work in government, if you work for an NGO, all enterprises exist for a basic purpose, to create value of some form. And what do you mean by value creation? Well, it generally means you get out more than you put in. That's kind of the simple model of thinking about value creation. And that model applies in business. You can think about it, return on investment. You can think about it through customer relationships, where if you buy a product and you feel you got more value than it cost you, that's usually a good thing. And I think we also have an opportunity to think about that on a very personal level. We're each vested with a certain amount of human capital in our lives, and we each have a certain responsibility to create more than we started out with the gift of human capital. So you can think about it on a lot of different levels. But if you ask most people in an organization how the organization creates value or how they personally contribute to that value creation, I've seen a lot of organizations where people have a hard time answering that question. And in our company, we want folks to know the answer instantly, because that's how you stay aligned on where you're trying to go, how you can think about the work that you're doing and the impact that it's having for your customers, the impact that it's having for your fellow employees. We're a publicly traded company, so we want folks to understand how it has impact for our shareholders as well. But there are a lot of different dimensions to value creation, and I think it's an important part of the dialogue, and it's what we look for, particularly as individuals want to progress up the ranks within our company. They need to really have that as a core part of their vocabulary and an ability to communicate with others in the organization to help us stay on the right path.
So let me ask you a question about your own journey. When, you know, you were happy, comfortable doing, you know, engineering.
I was.
And then at some point, you know, you tapped and people said, we want you to do something else. Mm-hmm. How did you feel about that?
So I initially felt quite conflicted. I enjoyed my engineering curriculum in college, and I really enjoyed being an engineer. When I first came into industry, I worked in the space part of our business and spent about a decade doing hands-on engineering and designing space systems, primarily for national security applications. And I got a lot of personal pleasure out of that. You know, there's nothing quite like seeing something that you've designed go into operation and actually support an important mission, and then to hear feedback from customers, people that you care a lot about, that their mission is getting done the right way, tell you that it's working and that it's doing good things. So I was initially resistant to doing anything other than continuing to do what I was enjoying so much and where I felt like I was contributing value. And I will tell you what eventually caused me to be interested in shaping my career path a bit different was I realized that the people who were pushing me in that direction were people that I really trusted, people that I very much admired, and the framework was you actually have a responsibility to take on more and to help lead. And at the end of the day, that was what impacted my view of, all right, I should listen to that. These are folks that I trust. And when I did it, I found that my sense of value creation and contribution to the organization continued to increase, and that I could help and I could make a difference in doing things at perhaps a different level than my formal education had prepared me for, or that I had even imagined that I wanted to do. And despite that very positive experience early on in my career, I will tell you that there were a number of times over the course of my career where I rejected the idea that I should do something different. Working in the space side of our company, eventually got to the point where I was running our space business. And I was absolutely convinced at that point that that was the best job in the world, that I would never, ever want to do anything different, and that I was making the biggest impact that I could possibly make. And having been in that job for only about 2 years, the fellow who was at that time the CEO of our company called me, asked me to come over to his office, and explained to me that it was time for me to be the chief financial officer. And I didn't see that one coming, and I had very little preparation to be a chief financial officer. I think I took one accounting course someplace along the way. So I didn't see myself as prepared for that. And I said I need a little time to think about it. So he gave me an entire night to give it some thought. And as with most things, when I came home that evening, my wife, Natalie, could tell that I was really struggling with some decision. And she said, all right, what is it? What are you trying to figure out? And I said, well, Ron has asked me to become the chief financial officer of the company, and I don't want to let the company down. I feel very strongly about the company being successful, and I really don't think I'm the right person for it. And she said, as she just has this amazing way of doing it, she said, well, Ron has clearly thought about this a lot, and there must be a reason he's asking you to do it. And I said, yeah, there is. He feels that we need to kind of shape things in a different direction, and that someone who really understands the operations of the business and has sort of an analytical bent could help us do that. And she said, well, why don't you listen to him? She was right. She was absolutely right. And it was one of the best experiences I ever had in my career, taking something on so completely different and learning very, very quickly, because I had to, but understanding how to really take advantage of the breadth of expertise that we had in the company in that particular part of our organization. So I've taken away from my, I characterize it as slow learning sometimes on the benefit of really listening to the folks that you work with When you're getting pushed to go do something that may be uncomfortable, try to find your way to yes, if you trust the folks that are pushing you in that direction. And it's hard. It's often hard to do it, but it's important to do it.
So let's have a question from the social media. Go ahead.
So our first question is going to be from our Facebook live stream. It says, it seems inevitable that autonomous systems will take over a majority of skilled labor jobs in the world. Do governments have a responsibility to relieve displaced workers due to these advancements in technology? And if not, what does Northrop Grumman plan to do for its workers?
Yeah. So the advent of autonomous systems, and in particular as we are seeing this convergence between cognitive capability, cognitive intelligence, and autonomous systems, it is going to change a lot in our world. And I know there are many who fear that change. In fact, just about every movie that's ever been made about the convergence between autonomy and cognitive intelligence doesn't paint a very bright picture of the future, right? But that's how you sell movies. I think the reality is that this is another wave of technology that will have vast benefits for humankind. And as we think about that future and realize that it's going to happen, there isn't a reason for it to slow down, and whether we choose to progress it or we leave that to others, it's going to happen, and better that we be the leader in it as it moves forward. So how do we deal with the social implications, right? And we face this with each wave of technological innovation. And sometimes in hindsight, it almost seems a little bit silly that we struggled so much with it. I'll tell you one experience, a personal experience in the space industry. Early on, when we were all pushing hard for the development of the Global Positioning System, GPS, something we all take for granted today, there was a rather significant upswelling of anxiety about the displacement of all of the folks around the globe who operated the old navigation systems. And probably few of you remember TACAN or LORAN or all the old ways of navigating. And yes, there was anxiety around that. But can you imagine today a world without GPS? I think a lot of folks would have a hard time finding their way around without GPS. I mean, it's one of those things we just treat as a utility that's out there. But we struggled with its introduction. And I think the same thing is happening with autonomy. Early on, there was a lot of concern about displacement of factory workers with robots in factories. And what we all realized was, yes, there will be some displacement, but it actually creates new jobs for those who can actually work with the robots and can actually program them, for those who can ensure that they're doing the right things and engage in them. So there is a retraining process that we have to go through. And it goes back to what I was highlighting about the importance of business working with higher education. And it's higher education at all levels. It's not only the great research universities like Northeastern, it's also the two-year universities. There are a lot of jobs in our country open today for those with two-year university degrees that need to be focused on that level of education that supports autonomy. And we're having trouble filling them. In fact, we just did a survey from the Business Roundtable of openings in the U.S. today and of the major corporations in the country. And about half of those openings are at the two-year college level. And there are something like 170,000 openings unfilled because we aren't getting people back through that system.
In which domains?
It's largely in the domains associated with advanced manufacturing and the other areas that are at the stage of technology where you don't need to be a full-up engineer to work with it, but you need to have some degree of math competency, some degree of coding competency. And I think to the point of the question, many of the folks who have been displaced, if we can do the right things with education, the opportunities are out there. Fundamentally, I think the basic thing to understand is if we can continue to grow the economy, then we can grow jobs. We have to do retraining. We have to do the things necessary to enable workers to take advantage of a growing economy. But the innovation that we can create, and autonomous systems are a great example of that, grows our economy over time. That creates jobs. And so we do have a collective responsibility to support all levels of education that enable workers to find those opportunities.
Let's take one more question. If you can get the mic closer to you. And if you want to raise questions here, raise your hand, you'll have the mic coming to you. So we have a question on this side, actually several questions, also this side. So the mic will come to you. Go ahead.
Sure. So our next question is also from the Facebook live stream. It says, how will these innovations and the interdependency of all fields affect the privacy of people?
Affect the privacy?
Privacy of people.
Yes, yeah. So another great question, right? And one that we've all struggled with a little bit as we have this amazing sort of transition in the way that we look at technology. Early on in the discussion of privacy, I think there was a general assumption that most people would not be too public with a lot of their what we would otherwise think of as private information. But if you look at Facebook and you look at so many other forms of social media, the interesting phenomena is people are quite free with a lot of their information that many of us would have otherwise thought they would want to maintain in a private manner. And so we have that sort of social phenomena occurring at the same time that we have cybersecurity issues and other elements of technology progress that make it easier for those in a negative manner who want to obtain private information to obtain it. So I think a lot of this goes back to the areas of innovation that we need to focus on. There really isn't too much of a technology problem associated with securing these levels of privacy, but we have to decide that it's important, we have to invest in it, and then we actually need the overlay of the legal system to work with technology to make it happen. And I'll just give one example of that. If you look at the difficulty that occurred in getting the most fundamental form of cybersecurity legislation passed through the US Congress, it took years to get to a point where we could figure out how to do information sharing, because there were very legitimate concerns on the one hand around securing our critical infrastructure in our company, but on the other hand on protecting privacy. And we really had a hard time reconciling those two concerns to get to a methodology that would allow information sharing across enterprises so that we could more quickly deal with attacks on our critical infrastructure. Because you need to do that. You have to share information. When one part of the infrastructure is getting attacked, you have to share information with the other parts so that they can more quickly protect themselves. But you've got to do it in a way that manages privacy and protects privacy concerns. And so my sense is we're going to be paced on that more by our collective ability as a society to figure out the mechanisms that we will use to do it than we will be paced by the technology. The technology is essentially there to enable us to do it, but we need a context, a legal context and a societal context within which we can make those changes. And I think that's where so much opportunity will be present in the coming decades for those who have the level of education that Northeastern students are getting to see their role not only as innovators in a technological sense, but to see their roles in a societal context for how we actually make these innovations have the impact and create the outcomes that we all desire.
Great. So we have, who has the mic? Yes.
I have the mic right here. All right, thank you for coming. I loved hearing your thoughts on this. My question is related to what you were talking about, risk adversity. And the necessity to not be risk adverse.
Get it close,
yes.
yeah.
So how, as a leader, do you balance that dirty word bottom line with being non-risk adverse? I was just wondering if you had some thoughts on that.
Great question.
So I think it's actually more about the way you engage in an organization than it is some inherent trade-off between the bottom line. Like most things, when you are looking at an enterprise that is taking on a variety of activities, you need to manage it in a portfolio sense. So there are many things that you have in any organization that are operating in a very efficient manner. They're going to contribute well to the bottom line. And you need to do the right things to make sure they're on track. But you also need to have, as a part of your portfolio, and this applies at universities, it applies in companies, all sorts of organizations, you need to have a part of the portfolio that is at the higher risk end of the spectrum where you actually expect failures. And when the failures happen, how you respond to them is critically important, especially as a leader. Because if your response to a failure is a negative response to a team that's worked really hard to try and make something happen, it doesn't happen, you quash innovation. So there's a portfolio perspective to it from an enterprise management viewpoint, but there's also an important leadership characteristic around how to deal with failure. It's really important in our organization. We not only advanced in very advanced technologies, not all of which we expect to work out, we also take on programs for our customer community that have a much higher degree of risk than you might see in other industries. And it's that way because our customers have to push for technological superiority as well. And when something fails, it's not only how we respond to it, but how our customers respond to it that we have to manage to make sure that we continue to generate the right type of culture within our organizations to move forward. And what I have found that helps the most in that regard is to be clear about the importance of bad news traveling faster than good news. You know, everyone likes to promote the good news in an organization, but if you can really create a culture where people feel really comfortable getting up as quickly as they can and saying, hey, this either has failed, or if we don't get this kind of help, something's going to fail, and for the organization to be positively and constructively responsive to it, then you're winning if you're positively, constructively responding to it. If you're not, you're sending the wrong message. And I think is a characteristic of large organizations that they tend to migrate to a place of more risk aversion if you don't have proactive leadership engagement on that. And it's not easy. I mean, you know, there are some days when you get the 12th or 13th piece of bad news, you know, on a long day, you have to grit a little bit to not have a negative reaction. But then it's even more important. It's even more important that you have a positive, constructive response to an outcome that wasn't maybe what you were expecting.
That's great. So, it's
Hello.
Denise.
Thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm Denise Garcia, professor of our College of Social Sciences and Humanities. And one of the courses I teach is international law. I'd love my students of international law to be your co-op students. But one of my research projects right now is examining to what extent will new technologies, especially autonomous weapons systems, will disrupt the future of peace and security. I testified this year to the United Nations member states on that in Geneva, and I'm obviously very concerned and to see what is your leadership in that area with other companies as well. Thank you very much.
No, I think this is a really important area to deal with as we think about the future of warfare. You know, our first focus on autonomous systems has been to keep people out of danger zones. And so in our company, our view on autonomous systems has been first and foremost on the class of systems that conduct surveillance. And we have a variety of those types of systems that operate today. Global Hawk is probably the best known of those systems. These are systems that fly aloft at very, very high altitudes for very, very long periods of time. And if you've ever seen what happens to a human in that condition, it's not a good thing. A pilot being asked to fly those types of missions is a very, very tough thing on them. So this has been more the ability to take humans out of a tight spot, and to the extent that we can do better surveillance, and not just our country but others, that tends to be a stabilizing influence. When you're able to communicate with other countries about what they're doing that may not lead to a good outcome, and they're able to communicate with you in that direction, we see that class of technology as being very stabilizing. The question then becomes, as the technology advances more into the combat operations side of things, and the first instinct of all of us is, to the extent that we can remove our folks from combat, the better off we're going to be. And that is, I think, a very natural response to it. But then I think perhaps the direction of your question is what happens to escalation when humans aren't as involved in the realm of combat. And so this is, I think, going to be an important area for international law to deal with over time. particularly when you get to the place where autonomous systems could potentially have the ability to release weapons. And our view, and I think our customers' view at this point, is we're going to keep a human in the loop at all times. People need to make those decisions, not machines. And it's where we as a society choose to draw the lines that are going to be really important as we go forward. And now, if you roll the tape forward 100 years from now, might humans reach a different decision? Might humans trust the machine more than an emotional state of a human being? Hard to tell today. But I think we will take this technology and the social decisions that go with it on in steps. And I think it's really important that we take it in steps so that we can, over time, develop greater and greater confidence in how things will work. An interesting sort of sidelight to that, if you had looked back on the question of autonomous piloting 20 years ago, most people would have bet that the machine could not do a better job of providing a safe flight environment than a human pilot. And we're in a very different place on that today. There are far fewer crashes of systems that are truly autonomous than there are of systems that are piloted by a human. In fact, there have been a few airliner accidents that the subtext on the accident report was the crash occurred because of good weather. Because it was only in good weather that the human pilot would turn the autopilot off and practice their skills. So, that the way we think about these technologies will change as time goes forward, but we have to build our confidence in them, and we do have to take it a step at a time. And I do think there is an important role for international law in that process.
Speaking of international, you, by definition, are global.
We are.
And you yourself lived overseas. How important is it for you to have a global competence around you?
Yes. It is absolutely critically important. Anything that any enterprise takes on of any scale, any significance, has to be global in nature. And it is sometimes, I think, a misunderstood view that you build little walls around things to try and keep them just within our boundaries, and that just never works. We have to have a global context for just about anything that we take on. And I think the last question was a good example of that. But that means that our team has to have global experience, that our team has to have the ability to think about things in as broad a context as possible, whether it is a global view of technology, which is fascinating in terms of the pace of innovation around the globe, a global view of how security environments operate and are perceived around the globe, certainly a global view of the legal conditions around the globe. And you don't get that by spending all your time in the United States. You have to be traveling around the world, interacting with other human beings, and understanding where they are coming from and the way that they're thinking about the changes that are in front of all of us. So it's a core part of the transition that we've been making in our company, because historically we tended to be more domestically focused because, quite frankly, we operate at a level of technology where the export control restraints did not afford us significant market opportunities. That has changed over the last number of years, and we have become much more global. And we've had to work hard on ensuring that we've got the leadership capacity in our organization to truly be a global enterprise. And a lot of that comes down to making sure that we have talent in our company that's not just from the US, that really has that broader perspective.
Great. You have been waiting patiently. Raise your hand in case you want to raise another question. Please, go ahead.
Thanks for being here, Mr. Bush. I'm very interested in the diversity of the organization and the leadership. Could you please tell me more about, could you be more specific?
Yes.
What kind of diversity are you looking for to create an innovative organization? Thanks.
Yes. So let me tell you a little bit about our journey on diversity. One thing that I really love about our culture and have from day one is that technologists tend to be inclusive in their mindset to begin with. They're just looking for people who are smart and have the best ideas. And so that's kind of a nice thing to start with in any organization. And we've had that as a value within our company for many, many years. Where we were failing, if I turn the clock back about a decade ago, where we had failed as an organization was in advancing diversity up through the ranks of the company and having the benefit of a truly diverse leadership team. And by diversity, it can be gender, it can be what your racial background might be, it can be your global identity. There are a lot of different measures that you can attribute to diversity. And despite our good efforts in getting a more diverse leadership team in our company, we had not made progress. And in fact, when I became CEO, if you just looked at the folks reporting directly to me, we only had one woman on our senior leadership team. And that wasn't a great thing, that was an awful thing. So I saw it as an indication that good effort wasn't yielding good outcome. And so we changed our approach within our company. We stopped measuring effort. We started measuring outcome. And we started measuring it in a way that matters a lot to people. We put it in our incentive system. And it's been phenomenal what's happened. If you look at the ranks within our company, the leadership ranks, we are the most diverse aerospace and defense company out there by a long shot. And it's not just that it happened. It was the focused determination of our team to make those changes. So today, half of my direct reports are women. We have, not only on my direct report team, but throughout our organization, people of color of all different backgrounds. We have a growing international representation in our leadership. And it has transformed the way that our company operates. And I find it to be not surprising at all that the level of performance that we're demonstrating today is far greater than the level of performance we were demonstrating a decade ago. I give credit to the team for driving those outcomes, to getting the diversity in our leadership ranks that makes us a better company. We ask tougher questions of ourselves. We look at problems from many different angles today that we did not in the past look at them from. We generate new ideas at a rate that we have not in the past generated them. It has been transformative for our organization. So for me, I love evidence. I'm an engineer by training, so I look for, is there cause and effect? Is there evidence? This one could not be more clear. And as I said in my remarks, when I'm looking at something that's not going right in the company, I can usually attach some aspect of the root cause to a lack of diversity in the process. And it's a really powerful thing. But as I also said in my remarks, diversity in and of itself is not enough. Diversity without inclusion is almost a waste of time, because if you don't have an inclusive environment where everyone can bring everything they've got to the game, then you're not getting the power of diversity. And so we've also had to work hard on that. And there too, we decided, and perhaps we were a little bit slow on this, we were measuring diversity first, and it took us just a few years, but we then realized we had to measure inclusion as well. And that has been a wonderful process for our company, because it has engaged our employees in a very different discussion.
How do you measure
than we
inclusion?
ever had. We ask people.
Uh-huh.
That's what it comes down to. Now, you have to do it in a scientific way. You have to do it in a way that enables you to really look at the responses that you're getting, to make sense of it, to test where you are. And we've done a lot of work to get there, and it's not just us. We've used some outside organizations that have helped us move to a place where we can really test it. But just as a little indicator, when we send out, we do this annually, we ask all of our employees to participate in grading us on how we're doing in a lot of these different dimensions. And they do it anonymously, so there isn't attributions. Most employees that do employee surveys on a good year maybe get 40-45% survey response. Dana, what did we get last year? 86% of our employees responded, and almost all of them didn't just check the squares. They had They did the right intersections.
They wrote.
And wow, is that great opportunity for any enterprise to get that many employees who care enough about the enterprise to spend their time to make recommendations on how we can continue to improve.
That's terrific.
And what we do as a leadership team is we take all of that information and we boil it down to the set of actions that we need to take to continue to change. And then we ask our employees in the following year, how well did we do? So we hold ourselves against an accountability metric of performance against what our employees told us we needed to do. Now, sometimes there are some things that we don't do because they would benefit one group and not a broader group. And so, there's a process you have to go through to make sense of the feedback. But nevertheless, I think accountability is a core metric. And we also have accountability in our incentive system.
Great. We don't have time anymore for questions, so let me do something. I know Wes. I know he can handle 2 questions from you from the social media. So go ahead, 2 questions, and he will merge that in his answer.
All right, sure. They're a little different. So we'll see how this goes.
That's a challenge.
Exactly. So one of them is, what new trends or new technologies do you think will be influential in 2017, and how about micro drones? That's question 1.
Micro drones, okay.
Yeah. Question 2 is, what advice would you give to students here who are interested in a career in the aerospace industry? What types of co-op or internship experiences do recruiters look for in entry-level hires?
Okay. Well, I actually can blend those two together because
Let's add a third one. No, that's fine. That's fine.
what we are looking for are precisely, as I said earlier, the students who are going to bring great innovation and who love that, who love the pace of change that not only is happening in our globe, but the change that we need to have within our enterprise to deal with, to the first question you have, what's happening in technology. And here's a message I would hope that students take away who are studying fields of technology. What's happening out there today isn't just about one field or another. And oftentimes I get the question about what are the most interesting areas? And I think people are expecting me to say something, well, it's autonomy, or it's cognitive, or it's cyber, or you name it, nano, right? I mean, we could go on and on with the list of the fields. What's really happening? Convergence. Convergence is changing the outcomes. And those students and then those employees who understand convergence and can think multidisciplinary, who can engage across the boundaries of different disciplines to help create new ideas, that's where the real power of innovation is occurring. And it's occurring in unexpected areas. I mean, when I was a student, if someone had told me that today we'd be thinking about the convergence of quantum physics and biology, that's right.
Yeah.
Here we are. Here we are. And it's exciting. It's incredibly exciting as we look at the future to think how rapidly we can continue to make change happen and stay at the forefront by bringing together so many great ideas. And where's the very best place that is happening in our world today? It's in higher education.
Yeah.
It's right here, and particularly at research universities like Northeastern. So you're all in a great place. I hope that the discussion this evening has been worthwhile for you. And I do hope as well that there might be some of you interested in a career in aerospace and defense. And if you are, the best place to be, Northrop Grumman.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you. We have a small gift for you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. I've been terrific. Thank you.
Thank you.